Here's something almost nobody plans for. You can save enough to retire, you can pay off the house, you can do everything the experts tell you to do, and then somewhere in your 70s or 80s, you lose the one thing all that money was supposed to protect. Not your savings, your independence. The day you can't drive yourself, cook for yourself, or manage your own medications, a hidden meter starts running. Most families never see it coming. And in America, that meter turns out to be one of the most expensive things you will ever face. Independence isn't a line item in a budget, but losing it is. Economists have a drier name for what we're talking about here. They call it long-term care or long-term services and supports. The help people need when they can no longer fully take care of themselves. And that help gets measured in a handful of basic tasks: bathing, dressing, eating, getting to the bathroom, moving from a bed to a chair. Lose the ability to do a couple of those on your own, and you've crossed a line that quietly reshapes your entire financial life. For most of American history, this was invisible work. A daughter, a wife, a neighbor handled it at home, unpaid, and nobody ever put a dollar figure on it. Then, the country changed. Families spread out across states and time zones. Women, who did the bulk of this caregiving, went to work in large numbers, and people started living much longer, often with years of frailty at the very end that earlier generations simply didn't survive long enough to reach. That gap between the people who need daily help and the families who can't be there around the clock is what created an entire industry: home care agencies, assisted living communities, nursing homes, adult day centers, and standing behind all of it, quietly paying more of these bills than anyone else, the government. The system exists because independence, it turns out, has an expiration date, and someone has to be there and get paid when it runs out. So, what does it cost to be taken care of? That depends entirely on how much help you need, and that's the first thing to understand. This is not one price. It's a ladder, and every rung up is more expensive than the last. Start at the bottom. A home aide who comes by to help with bathing, meals, and errands runs, on average, somewhere around $33 an hour. That sounds manageable until you count the hours. A typical arrangement assumes something like 44 hours of help a week. At that level, you're looking at roughly $75,000 to $78,000 a year. And that's for part-time help in your own home, with you still handling the nights. Move up a rung to assisted living. That's a private apartment with meals, some supervision, and help on hand when you need it. The national median now runs about $6,200 a month. That works out to around $74,000 a year, and it climbed 5% in the last year alone, on top of a 10% jump the year before that. If memory loss is part of the picture and you need a dedicated memory care unit, add roughly $1,000 a month on top. At the top of the ladder sits the nursing home, where trained staff provide skilled care around the clock. A shared room now runs close to $115,000 a year. A private room pushes toward $130,000. To put that in perspective, that single room costs more than the median American household earns in a year before taxes. And here's the part that turns a big number into a frightening one. These prices do not sit still. Over the past 20 years, nursing home costs have roughly doubled, climbing far faster than everyday inflation. Where you live matters too. The very same care can cost 2 or 3 times more in one state than in another. On average, people need this kind of help for about 3 years, but 1 in 5 will need it for more than 5. Do that math against those yearly figures, and a lifetime of savings can disappear into a single chapter at the end of a life. Now follow the money. Because the care industry isn't one business, it's several, and they each make money in very different ways. Assisted living is, at heart, a real estate business wearing a caregiving uniform. A lot of it is owned by real estate investment trusts and private equity firms, companies whose core job is to own the buildings and collect the rent. Because assisted living is paid for mostly out of families' own pockets, with very little government money flowing in, it behaves like premium housing. When the beds fill up, the rates go up. That's not a glitch in the model. That is the model. Nursing homes run on a different engine. A large share of their residents are paid for by the government, so their revenue is shaped by whatever the government agrees to pay. Those payments are often thin, which pushes operators to run lean. And some of the biggest chains are owned by investors focused hard on the bottom line. Researchers looking at private equity-owned nursing homes have raised real questions about what happens to staffing and quality when profit targets collide with fixed payments. Then there's home care, the fastest growing corner of all. The agency charges the family that $30-something hourly rate, but the aide doing the actual work usually sees only a fraction of it. And that points to the strangest fact in this entire economy. The workers at the very center of it are among the lowest paid in the country. Home health aides and personal care aides often earn near the bottom of the wage scale, with turnover so high that many agencies simply can't keep enough people on staff. There's also a quieter layer most families never notice. The free placement services that help you find a community are often paid a commission by the very facilities they steer you toward, sometimes worth a month or more of your rent. Move-in fees, community fees, and charges that climb as your needs grow are all baked in. The base price you get quoted is rarely the price you end up paying, so the money flows in a peculiar shape. Families pay a great deal, investors and property owners capture the margin, and the person actually holding your mother's hand at 2 in the morning is often making close to what a fast food shift pays. That gap between what care costs a family and what the caregiver earns is where a lot of the profit in this system quietly lives. Here's where most families get blindsided. They assume Medicare, the federal health insurance that kicks in at 65, will cover this. It won't. Not the part that matters most. Medicare pays for doctors, hospitals, and short bursts of skilled recovery. If you break a hip and need rehab, it will cover a skilled nursing stay for up to 100 days, and only under strict conditions, with your own out-of-pocket costs piling up after the first 3 weeks. But the ongoing daily help with bathing, dressing, and eating, what the system calls custodial care, is exactly the thing Medicare does not pay for. The single most likely major expense of your old age is the one your main insurance was never built to touch. So who does pay? First, you do, out of your own savings, your pension, your monthly Social Security check, and the equity built up in your home. You spend down what you have, and when it's nearly gone, when a lifetime of assets has been drained to your last few $1,000s, you land on Medicaid. That's the joint federal and state program for people with very low income. Medicaid is the real backstop of American long-term care. It covers more of these bills than anyone else, but only after you've become poor enough to qualify. A smaller group of people hold long-term care insurance, a policy that pays out once you can no longer handle a couple of those basic daily tasks on your own. But relatively few Americans ever bought it, and over the years, those policies have grown expensive and complicated. And then there is the largest payer of all, the one that never mails a bill. Family, unpaid relatives, mostly spouses and adult daughters, provide the bulk of long-term care in this country. Add up all their hours, and researchers now put the value at around $1 trillion a year. That is more than the entire Medicaid program spends. In fact, unpaid family members now provide more than half of all the long-term care delivered in this country. Many are giving high-intensity help, bathing, wound care, juggling a dozen medications for well over 20 hours a week, often while holding down a full-time job of their own. It's care that looks free because no money changes hands. It is not free at all. Now, the costs that never make it into the brochure start with the family caregiver, because that so-called free care carries a steep price of its own. Someone who steps back from a job to care for a parent doesn't just lose today's paycheck. They lose raises, promotions, retirement contributions, and years of their own Social Security credits. On top of that, the average family caregiver spends more than $7,000 a year out of pocket on everything from gas to grab bars. The person trying to protect a parent's savings is very often quietly draining their own. Then there's the quiet cost of the car keys. Most Americans outlive their ability to drive safely by somewhere between 7 and 10 years. And in a country where 3 out of 4 older people live in suburbs or small towns built entirely around the automobile, losing the keys means far more than inconvenience. People who stop driving make sharply fewer trips to the doctor and dramatically fewer trips to shop or to see friends and family. Independence doesn't only cost money to replace, sometimes it can't be replaced at all, and the isolation that follows carries its own real health price. The house itself becomes a bill. Aging in place, staying put in your own home, is what most people say they want, and it can absolutely be the right call. But the stairs, the slippery tub, the narrow doorways, all of it has to be dealt with. Grab bars, railings, and brighter lighting might run under $1,000, but widening doorways for a wheelchair, tearing out a tub for a walk-in shower, or putting in a stair lift can climb into the thousands or well beyond. And the prices keep moving underneath you. Care contracts routinely raise their rates every single year. Need a higher level of care, and the monthly bill jumps again. The number a family carefully budgets for at the start is almost never the number they're actually paying 2 years in. So why is it built this way? Not by accident. By a long series of choices. When Medicare was designed back in the 1960s, it was built to handle medical events, surgeries, hospital stays, doctor visits. The slow grind of decline wasn't really the picture lawmakers had in mind, and covering years of daily personal care for everyone would have cost an enormous amount. So the system leaned on two things instead: families doing the work for free and Medicaid catching people only after they'd spent nearly everything. That arrangement quietly shifts the cost off the government's books and onto kitchen tables. And it works, as long as there are enough family members with enough time. That's the assumption now starting to crack. By the middle of the next decade, older adults are set to outnumber children in the United States for the first time ever. Families are smaller, so there are fewer adult children to share the load. People are living longer, with more frail years at the end. The group of people needing care is growing, while the group available to give it is shrinking, and the cost of care keeps climbing faster than incomes do. None of this makes the system a fraud. Assisted living communities and nursing homes provide real, hard, around-the-clock work that most families honestly cannot do on their own. The tension here isn't between good guys and villains. It's that a system quietly built on unpaid family labor is now meeting a generation that has far less of it left to give. So what's the real economics of losing your independence? Here's the honest verdict. The care itself is, for the most part, worth what it costs to provide. Round-the-clock help from trained people is genuinely expensive, and most of that money isn't waste. The problem was never that care costs too much to deliver. The problem is who gets left holding the bill. The system is built so that the biggest and most predictable expense of a long life lands almost entirely on the individual and the family, right up until they're wiped out, at which point the government finally steps in. Medicare guards your health, but not your independence. Your savings protect you until the day they don't. And the trillion-dollar backstop propping up the whole arrangement is your own family, working for nothing. You spend a lifetime building a nest egg so you can feel secure when you're old. And in America, the thing most likely to swallow that nest egg isn't a luxury, and it isn't a mistake. It's simply needing a hand to get through the day. That is the price of growing old here, not the fear of dying. The cost of living, once you can no longer do it entirely on your own. If breaking the numbers down like this helped you see the system a little more clearly, consider liking this video and subscribing. It's the best way to support more deep looks at the money behind growing old in America.